Ever wondered what happens when arrogance meets the wrong homeowner? They say revenge tastes better cold, but sometimes it's best served at 3 a.m. with a convoy of tow trucks. Imagine this. You jolt awake to the sharp stench of burning asphalt invading your lungs. Your private gravel driveway, the one you spent $80,000 on precisely to dodge HOA interference, has been coated in blacktop overnight without your consent. Fence posts lay toppled like shattered bones. Survey markers obliterated by a sledgehammer. Then comes the letter. The HOA president dares to invoice you $3,200 for this so-called community upgrade while demanding monthly fees. Her smug tone oozes off the page as she insists your rustic road required proper standards. What she failed to realize? I'm a retired commercial developer holding a covert towing agreement with every impound lot in the county. By sunrise, every car tied to her little HOA clique had disappeared into oblivion like a magic trick gone wrong. If someone destroyed your property overnight, what would you do? And what's the most outrageous HOA story you've lived through? My name's Garrett Rockwell, and 3 years ago, I thought I'd secured my version of heaven. After selling my concrete construction company in Dallas, my wife Elena and I purchased our dream retreat, 3 acres in the rolling Texas Hill Country on the border of Willowbrook Commons. Our home sat 400 yards back from the main road, reached by a gravel drive that crackled under tires like cereal and naturally slowed down traffic. Here's the detail that spared my sanity and my wallet. I bought that access road independently. No subdivision ties, no HOA authority, entirely private. The former owner, George Blackwood, a clever old rancher, had separated the road in 1987 to dodge community politics. I paid an extra $80,000 for the privilege, and it was worth every cent. Elena, a high school principal, practical to the core, carried a laugh strong enough to end any dispute. Our daughter Sophia, 15, focused on college goals and wisely avoided teenage drama. We came here for peace, privacy, and family moments money can't buy in the city. Most nights, we sat on the back porch listening to mockingbirds while Elena's jasmine perfumed the breeze. Then along came Vivian Ashworth, the living embodiment of a parking ticket. Picture the most self-important real estate agent you've ever met, multiply her by 10, and hand her a gavel plus the title of HOA president. Vivian cruised around in a white BMW X5 with vanity plates reading Prop Ken. And yes, she thought that was clever. Vivian had been president for 3 years, during which she dragged a dozen neighbors into lawsuits over everything from mailbox paint shades to feeding too many birds. She actually measured lawn height with a ruler she kept in her purse, the way others carry breath mints. Her specialty was what I called premium community management, finding clever ways to drain money from residents while boosting her own real estate profits. She could turn simple requests into fabricated emergencies and personal whims into untouchable rules. The real conflict began on a Tuesday morning in March. I was drinking coffee when the roar of heavy equipment tore through the quiet. Out the window, I saw a construction crew pouring hot asphalt across my gravel drive. The acrid mix of tar and diesel stung my nose as I realized what they were doing. The foreman waved a work order signed by Vivian. Community Access Improvement Project, Willowbrook Grand Entrance. My fence posts were yanked out like weeds, tossed aside. The steel survey markers I'd paid to have installed were smashed into useless fragments. At the entry point, they had erected stone columns with shiny brass plaques declaring Willowbrook Commons Grand Entrance, Est 2023. They were literally paving away my rights. I marched down to the HOA office in the strip mall, gravel still clinging to my boots. Vivian sat there like royalty, surrounded by awards, smiling a smile sharp enough to cut glass, her perfume heavy in the air. "We're bringing your rustic access up to community standards," she said, dragging out rustic as if it were an infection. She laid out a blown-up map showing my road in yellow, labeled Future Community Thoroughfare. She claimed the former owner had verbally agreed to share it eventually. No paperwork, just her word against a dead man's. The next day, I received a certified letter, $3,200 for road upgrades, 85 monthly fees, and a 30-day demand to install community-approved landscaping. At the bottom were threats of liens and lawsuits for noncompliance. Elena's frustration echoed through the house as she slammed cabinet doors. Sophia's friends quickly turned the driveway into a parking lot and skate path, their wheels grinding across the new asphalt every morning at 7. What Vivian didn't know was that George Blackwood had included deed terms that would make her lawyers deeply regret the fight.
Still, she pressed ahead. Within a week, decorative stone markers with bright brass plaques announced the subdivision's grand entrance right on my drive. The boldness was staggering. She had literally rebranded my property as community land. And she wasn't finished. Soon after came a private security guard in a golf cart patrolling what she now called the community thoroughfare. One morning as I headed to town, he pulled me over at the end of my own drive. Clipboard in hand, he said, "Excuse me, sir, I need to see ID and verify you're authorized to use this access road." Rage filled my mouth with a metallic taste. "This is my property," I replied steadily, pointing at my house. He just shrugged. "Ma'am says," the guard muttered about vehicles needing verification and community safety protocols. I almost laughed at the absurdity of being carted just to drive to my own home. But it was no joke. Back in my construction career, I'd seen developers pull this same stunt, create a false sense of inevitability, then use security theater to pressure property owners into compliance. The correct term is extortion, though Vivian likely dressed it up as community improvement. The next morning, I filed a complaint with the county planning office. Most people don't realize this, but in construction, every single thing requires a permit. You can't pour concrete, shift drainage, or even mount a sign without official paperwork. Vivian's crew had already broken at least 3 city codes that I recognized. County records confirmed it. No permits at all for road work in our district. Within 2 days, a bright orange stop work notice was slapped on Vivian's shiny new entrance pillars. Watching it flap in the Texas breeze felt better than Christmas morning. Her retaliation was fast and petty. An emergency HOA board meeting was called for Friday night. I wasn't invited, of course, but my neighbor Marcus Webb, a retired Marine with sharp hearing and a habit of evening dog walks, passed by at just the right time. He later told me Vivian spent an hour raging about how I was sabotaging community growth and devaluing property values. The board then voted unanimously to fine me $500 per day for supposedly neglecting a common area. In reality, she was penalizing me for not maintaining my own private road to her standards. The gall was almost impressive. On Monday, a certified letter arrived, branding me persona non grata in my own neighborhood. The post office clerk looked embarrassed just handing it to me. But Vivian was only beginning her psychological warfare. She launched a so-called community awareness campaign, which basically turned my neighbors into free spokespeople. The pitch was simple. Garrett Rockwell's gravel road endangered school buses, and his legal resistance would crash everyone's property values. Elena came home from the store visibly shaken after 3 neighbors cornered her with warnings about my supposed legal issues. The scent of her lavender shampoo was overpowered by the sweat of that ambush. "They're making you out to be some kind of criminal," she whispered, hands trembling as she unpacked groceries. Janet Morrison even hinted we might be broke and ready to sell. While Vivian was busy stirring neighborhood politics, I set up a longer game. I called Dustin Chavez, my former partner and now a traffic engineering consultant, to commission a GPS-based land survey. It cost $3,200, the exact amount Vivian had demanded for her bogus roadwork. Justice, I figured, carried its own price tag. I also reached out to Rex Donovan, a retired sheriff's deputy turned private investigator, who specialized in unearthing public records people would rather hide. Within 3 days, Rex uncovered something remarkable. Vivian had been buying surrounding properties under shell companies for the past year and a half. Suddenly, the puzzle came together. I remembered the concept of prescriptive easement from my contractor days, the idea that long-term, open use could create rights over land, but only after a decade of continuous documented access. Vivian would need to show that the community had been driving my road since 2013, which was impossible since I gated it off every winter until 2019. I had receipts for everything: gate installation, repairs, maintenance, the whole record. I had records of every gate installation, private property sign, and snowplowing service that specifically excluded community vehicles. George Blackwood had done exactly the same thing every winter since 1987. Vivian's claims about historical usage were as flimsy as a paper umbrella in a hurricane. The minor twist came Friday afternoon via certified mail from Pete & Associates, the same law firm that had handled the sale of my business 3 years earlier. They knew I had money, which made their cease and desist letter especially brazen. They accused me of destroying community property with my survey stakes and threatened a $50,000 lawsuit plus attorney fees. The
Irony was rich, threatening to sue me for surveying my own land while defending someone who had actually destroyed it. That weekend, Elena found me in the garage sorting files and laughed. "You look like a general planning a campaign." "Funny you should say that," I replied, pulling out George Blackwood's carefully drafted deed restrictions. "Because that's exactly what this is." Vivian had clearly decided subtlety was for amateurs. Her next move was pure psychological warfare disguised as community engagement. She began organizing daily beautification walks, groups of 8 to 10 HOA supporters parading past our house with the deliberate focus of military scouts. They walked slowly, snapping photos on their phones, pointing at our landscaping, whispering like neighborhood paparazzi. The click of camera shutters became our new morning soundtrack, replacing the birdsong we'd moved here to enjoy. Vivian herself led these patrols, clipboard in hand, logging what she labeled safety violations and code infractions. Sophia started keeping her bedroom curtains closed in daylight. "It's like living in a fishbowl," she muttered, and she wasn't wrong. That afternoon, the Facebook posts began, photos of our perfectly normal house paired with passive-aggressive captions like, "Interesting landscaping choices," or "Wonder if this meets fire safety standards." The comment sections turned into digital lynch mobs, debating everything from our mailbox color to Elena's garden gnomes. But Vivian's administrative masterpiece was still ahead. Somehow, the county planning office had lost my original survey documents. A new clerk, a young woman who looked like Vivian's miniature twin and conveniently shared her last name, claimed there was no record of my permits or property boundaries. "You'll need to reapply for a driveway access permit," she said with a smile cold enough to freeze hell. "Filing fee is $2,800, and the process usually takes 6 to 8 months, during which," she explained, with visible satisfaction, "my road access would be questionable under county rules." I'd seen enough municipal corruption in my construction years to recognize a shakedown. This wasn't bureaucracy. It was extortion dressed up with a government seal. While I drowned in paperwork, Rex was earning every cent of his fee. His investigation uncovered something chilling. Vivian had been quietly building a property empire through shell companies, like a suburban real estate vampire. 6 different LLCs, all under her control, had bought parcels encircling my land over the past 18 months. Rex's aerial photos showed the pattern clearly. Vivian already owned property on 3 sides of my lot. Her ultimate plan wasn't about road access at all. It was about creating luxury estate lots by merging smaller parcels. My 3-acre Keystone property was the only barrier between her and a multi-million-dollar development. Back in my contractor days, I'd seen this exact maneuver, a strategy called assemblage, where developers quietly purchase adjoining parcels to form larger ones. The last holdout always faces the heaviest pressure because without their land, the whole investment collapses. That's when the sabotage began. On Thursday morning, the sharp stench of dying St. Augustine grass and withered rose bushes filled the air. Our irrigation system had failed during a brutal Texas heat wave. When I investigated, I discovered someone had deliberately cut the main water line under the new asphalt with surgical precision. Before I could even call a plumber, my phone rang. "Mr. Rockwell," Vivian's voice oozed false sympathy. "I understand you're planning to destroy community infrastructure. That will require board approval and a $5,000 damage deposit." She had sabotaged my property, then tried to extort me for repairing it. It was like being mugged and then charged for the bandage. That same week, Peyton and Associates escalated matters by filing for a preliminary injunction to block me from interfering with road maintenance. They sought a judge's order to remove my survey stakes and private property signs, claiming they harassed HOA members. I recognized the tactic from construction disputes: bury opponents in costly legal battles while continuing the very behavior at issue. It's designed to drain your wallet before the real case ever begins. But cracks were showing in Vivian's empire. Marcus Webb, the retired Marine, quietly offered me security cameras. Dr. Patricia Hernandez shared horror stories that made mine look tame. Janet Kowalski, a teacher with Pentagon-level organizational skills, revealed Vivian had tried to lowball her corner lot at half market value. When Janet refused, her garbage pickup conveniently stopped every other week. The pattern was obvious. Vivian wasn't just targeting me, she was systematically harassing anyone who resisted selling. Then came the tax bomb. The county reassessed my property using the so-called road
Improvements, nearly doubling my annual bill from $4,200 to $7,800. To appeal, I'd have to pay the inflated amount up front, just another pressure tactic. That evening, Elena and I sat on the back porch watching the sunset through a haze of dust and exhaust. The quiet we'd once loved was gone, replaced by traffic noise and teenagers using the asphalt as a skate park. "She's getting desperate," Elena muttered as another group of HOA supporters snapped photos of our house. "Good," I answered, texting Rex for updates. "Desperate people make stupid mistakes." Vivian's next move was pure theater. She arranged what she called an informal mediation session at the county commissioner's office. The invitation came on official letterhead, which should have been my first warning. From experience, I knew that any meeting labeled informal usually meant someone was about to get formally cornered. I walked in expecting discussion, but instead faced a setup that looked like a corporate takeover. 12 HOA board members, Vivian's lawyer, and a presentation binder thick enough to block bullets filled the room. The commissioners looked like hostages at their own meeting, while Vivian launched into a PowerPoint on community impact assessment. Her proposal was as insulting as it was absurd. I should sell my road easement to the HOA for $15,000, land worth at least $80,000. She was effectively asking me to pay her for the privilege of being robbed, legally mugged. "This is a generous offer, considering the legal complications your obstruction has created," Vivian said, sliding the folder across the table like she was granting me the deal of a lifetime. The scent of her expensive perfume couldn't hide the reek of desperation in the room. I stood, straightened my jacket, and gave what I hoped was a dignified response. "I'll consider your offer right after you consider my counterproposal of $0 and a public apology." Then I walked out, leaving them to explain to the commissioners why they had wasted everyone's time with legal theater. The real war began the following week with a front-page newspaper article: "Property Dispute Divides Willowbrook Community." Vivian had clearly spent hours coaching the reporter, painting herself as a reasonable leader dealing with one selfish neighbor blocking progress. I got exactly one paragraph to defend myself, buried on page 2 between a church bake sale notice and a lost dog ad. The aerial photograph they used was a propaganda gem. My house pictured as a stubborn island surrounded by progress. The online comments section became a digital gladiator pit where neighbors I'd never met debated my character, my finances, and Elena's garden decor. While Vivian played media mogul, I was methodically building my counteroffensive. Marcus's trail cameras were better than Christmas morning every day. Over 3 weeks, they captured footage of Vivian's crew pulling my survey markers at 2 a.m., dumping debris on my land, and, my personal favorite, her security guard harassing Sophia and her friends as they tried to check our mailbox. But Vivian's psychological warfare was extending beyond property lines. My homeowner's insurance company suddenly discovered that increased traffic created commercial liability exposure and demanded an extra $4,000 per year, citing an anonymous complaint about unsafe conditions. From my contractor days, I knew that when someone attacks your finances from multiple angles at once, they're following a playbook. This wasn't random harassment, it was a coordinated campaign to force a quick sale. The workplace intimidation sealed it. Elena came home pale and shaken after an informal chat with a school board member from our subdivision. Someone had filed an anonymous complaint suggesting my hostile legal behavior reflected poorly on her judgment as an educator. I'd seen that tactic during union disputes. If you can't break someone directly, target their family's livelihood. What Vivian didn't realize was that workplace intimidation used to coerce property transactions falls under federal civil rights law. She was building my lawsuit for me. Her legal Hail Mary came through a city planning petition to reclassify my road as a public thoroughfare. If successful, the city could seize it through eminent domain for token compensation, maybe $1, like those historic cases where governments took private land for public projects. The hearing was set for next month, giving Vivian time to pack the room with angry neighbors demanding I sacrifice my property rights for their convenience. But my secret weapon was growing stronger. Dr. Fernandez had been quietly digging through property law, finding precedents that shredded Vivian's case. Marcus was providing military-grade documentation of every harassment incident. Janet launched a social media counter-campaign exposing Vivian's shell company acquisitions. And Rex's financial deep dive uncovered the smoking gun. Vivian was
bleeding cash like a broken hydrant. Her shell companies owed $340,000 to multiple lenders. Her credit cards were maxed out at $67,000. Her real estate license was under state investigation for undisclosed conflicts of interest. She was 90 days from bankruptcy unless she flipped enough properties to cover her gambling losses. My refusal to sell wasn't just blocking her development, it was threatening her financial survival. Friday brought the utility warfare. Anonymous complaints about my power lines crossing Community Road triggered an $8,500 relocation study demand. My internet mysteriously failed. That same week, expensive utility repairs were required where the asphalt had been cut. That evening, Elena found a note tucked under her windshield at school. "Stop your husband before this gets worse." She handed it to me with steady hands, though the fear in her eyes was impossible to miss. "She's getting desperate." "Good," I replied, photographing the evidence. "Desperate people make career-ending mistakes." Sometimes the most important discoveries come from the unlikeliest places. Rex uncovered our smoking gun in the courthouse basement, buried in a cabinet that probably hadn't been opened since the Reagan years. The musty scent of dust and paper left him sneezing for an hour, but what he found made it worthwhile. George Blackwood, that brilliant old rancher, had been playing four-dimensional chess back in 1987. The original deed restrictions contained language that would make any property lawyer weep with joy. Access roads shall remain private property in perpetuity, not subject to any homeowner association covenants, assessments, or interference whatsoever. In perpetuity, forever, until the stars burned out or Texas froze over. The document was notarized, filed in triplicate, and cross-referenced with the surveyor's office. George had deliberately shielded the road from future HOA claims, writing it as protection against neighborhood busybody interference with a man's God-given right to drive on his own damn land. I felt like building a shrine to that cantankerous cowboy. But Rex's corporate digging uncovered something even more devastating. The shell companies weren't just acquiring land, they were borrowing huge sums using projected HOA income as collateral. Community development partners had taken $2.4 million in loans from 3 banks, promising repayment through expanded membership fees. The whole scheme depended on rezoning the area as a luxury estate community to justify the payments. Without my property completing the puzzle, Vivian's financial empire would collapse like a house of cards in a Texas tornado. I sat at my kitchen table reading Rex's timeline, the bitter taste of realization in my mouth. Vivian had borrowed against future HOA assessments, betting she could force me into membership within 6 months. Quarterly loan payments were due in 8 weeks. Without rezoning, she would default on $2.4 million in loans plus her personal stakes. She wasn't harassing me for sport, she was fighting for financial survival. The corruption ran deeper than small-town incompetence. County Commissioner Bradley Morse wasn't just rubber-stamping permits, he was her brother-in-law. His construction company had pocketed $47,000 in no-bid HOA contracts for emergency improvements that conveniently required permits only he could authorize. Rex found 17 permit approvals violating procedure, all benefiting Vivian's projects or Morse's business. I'd seen corruption before, but this was textbook racketeering, the kind federal prosecutors dream about. The insurance fraud pattern was equally bold. Vivian had filed claims against 3 past holdout neighbors, collecting $89,000 in settlements for property damage and supposed trauma. The insurers paid rather than fight, not realizing they were funding an intimidation campaign. She'd been profiting from terrorizing her neighbors like a suburban mob boss. Environmental violations pushed it further. EPA records showed the roadwork diverted protected wetland drainage without assessments. Federal law imposes $37,500 daily penalties until remediation, and violations like these can trigger criminal charges against the permit signers. And Commissioner Morse's signature was on every fraudulent environmental waiver. Back in my construction days, I'd heard prosecutors use the term RICO enterprise, an organized criminal operation built on intimidation and fraud. The Federal Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act was designed for exactly this type of scheme: systematic property acquisition through corruption, with penalties that included triple damages and 20-year prison sentences. Elena found me in the kitchen that evening, surrounded by Rex's evidence files, grinning like I'd just struck oil in my backyard. "You look different," she said, pouring coffee and sitting beside me. "I feel different," I replied, sorting the documents that would dismantle Vivian's
empire. For the first time since this started, I'm not on defense. The balance of power had shifted. Vivian now needed my cooperation to avoid both financial collapse and federal prosecution. She just didn't realize it yet. Knowledge is power, but organized knowledge is a weapon. That weekend, I turned our garage into what Elena called the war room. Maps covered the walls, legal documents hung from clotheslines like evidence boards, and timelines stretched across folding tables like battle plans for D-Day. Marcus brought military planning skills and surveillance equipment fit for the Pentagon. Dr. Hernandez contributed legal research sharp enough to shame most professors, along with medical documentation of the stress symptoms Vivian's campaign had caused. Janet arrived with her teacher's organizational superpowers and enough color-coded folders to stock an office supply store. "This looks like either a boring movie set or the most interesting garage sale in Texas history," Elena joked, sipping her coffee. My first call was to Catherine Silverman, Dallas's most feared property rights attorney. With a 94% win rate and a reputation for making opposing counsel break down in depositions, she was the perfect weapon. Her plan was brilliant in its simplicity. File a quiet title action and a federal environmental complaint the same day as the HOA's public hearing. We'll shift the burden of proof onto them while exposing the fraud, Catherine explained. By the time they respond, they'll be defending criminal charges instead of attacking your property rights. The evidence compilation took 3 days. Rex assembled 847 photographs, 23 hours of video, and 156 documents proving harassment and illegal property seizure. The timeline outlined escalating criminal behavior that any federal prosecutor would chase like sharks to blood. Most people don't understand SLAPP suits, strategic lawsuits against public participation. These are legal weapons meant to silence opposition with crushing legal costs rather than win in court. Texas has strong anti-SLAPP laws with mandatory attorney fee awards for victims. Vivian's harassment campaign fit the definition perfectly, which meant she'd be footing my legal bills. Catherine's financial strategy was even sharper. We filed an insurance claim against the HOA's liability policy for property damage, triggering an investigation into their coverage. When insurers uncover fraud or hidden risks, they void policies retroactively, leaving board members personally liable for every judgment. The public relations counterstrike began Tuesday. Janet helped Elena create a Facebook group called Willowbrook Property Rights Alliance, where we exposed the truth about Vivian's shell company acquisitions. Dr. Hernandez posted detailed breakdowns of HOA overreach and intimidation, read like research reports, but struck like hammers. Marcus added his military insight on proportional response and engagement rules, showing how Vivian's moves broke basic standards of civilized conflict resolution. Within 2 days, membership grew to 127 residents who shared their own stories of HOA abuse and financial misconduct. My hidden advantage was Jake Morrison, head of Morrison Recovery Services. Jake handled HOA towing contracts and knew every insider in the trade. When I told him our problem, his worn face split into a grin sharp enough to scare a rattlesnake. "That woman owes my company $12,000 for unpaid towing jobs," Jake said, pulling out a stack of invoices. "Been chasing payment for 8 months. You know what that means." I did. Mechanics liens rank higher than most debts and can force property sales to satisfy contractor claims. Jake's overdue bills created a legal hold on the HOA's common assets that could tear apart Vivian's entire financial base. The neighborhood intel system spread like a web of suburban scouts. 5 neighbors stepped in as early warning watchers, each covering a different area: HOA meetings, permits, construction work, and online activity. Marcus built encrypted messaging with military-grade protocols strong enough to impress the NSA. Dr. Hernandez gathered allies in the planning office and school board, officials tired of Vivian's bullying tactics and shady ethics. The environmental report came from a wetlands specialist who confirmed EPA violations serious enough for federal charges. Local reporter Sarah Sawyer grew keen on the corruption angle. Her pitch was explosive. HOA president's secret umpire based on harassment and municipal fraud. Sarah had won awards exposing real estate scandals and agreed to wait for our legal filings. The psychological profile Dr. Hernandez drafted was chilling. Vivian showed classic narcissistic rage spiral, escalating hostility when challenged. The forecast was grim. She would likely resort to property damage or violence before yielding. "We must be prepared for her full breakdown," Dr. Hernandez warned in our last planning session. Narcissists under public
Dr. Hernandez warned in our last planning session, narcissists under public shame often turn dangerous. Catherine's legal move was clever in its misdirection. We filed initial papers but held off serving the HOA, creating the false signal I had backed away. This would push Vivian to overreach, hopefully committing crimes we could catch before unleashing our joint legal, media, and enforcement strike. That Thursday night, I stood in our command room surrounded by proof of Vivian's schemes. Feeling like a commander before battle, Elena squeezed my shoulder, grounding me in what mattered. "Ready?" she asked. "More than ready," I said, staring at the plan. "It ends now." Vivian's desperation soon hit wild levels that Tuesday night. Near midnight, I woke to the rumble of unmarked trucks outside our window. The sharp smell of asphalt and diesel filled the vents as a crew under floodlights installed speed bumps and no parking, resident-only signs on what she now boldly called community infrastructure. Marcus's cameras caught it all in crystal detail: plates, faces, and Vivian herself directing traffic like a suburban foreman. Her scheme was obvious: make permanent changes, then claim my pushback proved I wasn't a true community member with road rights. The footage was pure comedy. Vivian in a pink tracksuit and designer shoes, yelling orders at 2 a.m. while porch lights flickered on across the block. She looked like a reality star having a costly breakdown. But her next act crossed a line I hadn't seen coming, even from her. Thursday afternoon, while Elena loaded groceries, Vivian walked up in the school parking lot wearing the predatory grin of a car dealer closing a sale. "Elena, darling," Vivian purred, her voice dripping fake concern. "I know this whole ordeal has been rough on your family. I'm willing to give $25,000 cash just for the trouble if Garrett ends this absurd lawsuit." Elena, thank goodness, had the sense to start recording on her phone. What she caught was priceless. Vivian admitting the funds came from the Community Improvement Fund, which Rex had already shown was stolen HOA dues. She was literally offering a bribe with embezzled money while confessing to crimes on video. "Think about Sophia's college savings," Vivian pressed, still unaware she was being recorded. "This case could drag for years and ruin you financially." Elena's reply deserved an ovation. "The only thing ruining us is dealing with crooks who treat community funds like their piggy bank." Meanwhile, Rex's probe into Commissioner Morse uncovered proof. The inspector who approved Vivian's permits had never even visited the site. Approvals were rubber-stamped by email with backdated signatures. When the Attorney General received Rex's files, they launched an investigation bound to make Morse's future miserable. The harassment shifted into psychological warfare straight from Cold War playbooks. Anonymous flyers appeared on car windshields, claiming I ran an illegal business from home. False complaints flooded the fire marshal, alleging hazardous storage. In Vivian's warped view, my garage tools counted as industrial equipment. Someone even called child services with fake claims of unsafe conditions, forcing Elena to miss work while inspectors found nothing. The worker apologized, saying the law forced them to investigate all reports, no matter how absurd. Sophia's college applications were delayed by bizarre address issues targeting only our house. She still kept straight A's while facing abuse that would crush most adults. I was proud of her strength, though my anger grew daily. The vandalism worsened that Friday night. I woke to find our mailbox smashed, but Marcus's cameras caught 2 HOA board members swinging a bat at 3 a.m. My costly lawn had been poisoned with herbicide, leaving dead patches spelling out "Move in Dying Saint, Augustin grass." Garden hoses were slashed, flooding the basement with 3 inches of muddy water. The final blow was paint splashed on our siding from the road, bright orange streaks visible from the neighborhood entrance like a scarlet letter. The meaning was clear: mark the dissenter's home so all knew who was stirring trouble. From my years in construction, I knew vandalism meant serious pressure. Vivian's frantic attacks showed she was racing against a deadline I didn't yet grasp. The neighborhood was splitting apart. Vivian's emergency HOA meeting to expel troublemakers collapsed into yelling when Dr. Hernandez demanded financial records. Marcus directly challenged their power to fine residents for fabricated violations. Janet's sharp questions on shell company expenses left the treasurer fumbling. 3 more families quit the HOA outright, citing shady finances and targeted harassment of members. The exodus was growing as neighbors realized they could escape Vivian's rule simply by refusing to pay dues. Online battles hit a peak, with fake accounts spreading lies and insults about our family. Elena got private threats.
against her job and our safety. Sophia was bullied at school by kids whose parents had swallowed Vivian's poison. Yet beneath the chaos, something good was forming. Law enforcement was finally paying attention. The deputy who saw our mailbox smashed filed a formal report and called for more patrols. He recognized several HOA loyalists from past domestic violence cases, explaining their comfort with intimidation. Saturday night, I stood on the porch watching another patrol roll past, cigarette smoke drifting like a challenge across our yard. Elena joined me, slipping her hand into mine. "She's planning something bigger," Elena whispered. "I can feel it." "Good," I answered, thinking of Catherine's legal snare and Jake's tow trucks waiting nearby. Let her dig deeper. Vivian's last play came wrapped as community service. She staged what she called Community Action Day, a neighborhood beautification event to restore proper standards. The Facebook page looked cheerful: families, barbecue, lemonade. What it didn't say was the real plan. Over 20 neighbors armed with bolt cutters, hammers, and righteous anger aimed at every survey marker, camera, and private sign on my land. Saturday dawned with the roar of trucks converging like a suburban militia. Chainsaws, gasoline, and the clank of metal tools filled the air as her crew prepared for so-called emergency maintenance. I'd seen this coming for weeks. Marcus was in position with cameras while Rex coordinated with the sheriff. Elena and Sophia were safely in Austin with her sister. No reason for them to witness what was coming. Vivian stepped out of her BMW like a commander, clipboard ready, bolt cutters flashing in the sun. She even had matching Willowbrook Pride t-shirts for her crew. She had turned vandalism into a team exercise. "Morning, neighbors," she called brightly, her sales voice carrying across the line. "Ready to bring this corner up to proper standards?" The crowd cheered like it was a party instead of planned crimes. Watching grown adults in matching shirts preparing to wreck private property was surreal enough to shame Salvador Dali. That's when I stepped out with my camera and Deputy Rodriguez, who Marcus had quietly called. Rodriguez, a seasoned veteran, had been logging Vivian's escalating stunts for weeks. His presence froze the demolition party into silence. "Step back from the property line," Rodriguez ordered, his hand resting on his radio. "This is private land and you're trespassing." Vivian's answer was all theatrics. She gripped her bolt cutters like a weapon and shouted about harassment of taxpayers while her followers shuffled uneasily. She even accused the deputy of being on my payroll, forgetting that in Texas, questioning an officer's integrity is not a smart move. "This man is destroying our community," she screamed, pointing the cutters at me like a crazed conductor. "We have every right to protect our property values." Deputy Rodriguez's patience had limits. When Vivian stepped onto my land with cutters in hand while shouting threats, he'd had enough. The snap of handcuffs broke the silence as two of her boldest followers joined her in being cited for criminal trespass. But here's where her PR plan collapsed. She had invited a local TV crew, expecting sympathy for a blocked neighborhood project. Instead, they filmed her arrest, bolt cutters in hand, ranting about property rights. Reporter Sarah Sawyer, already digging into our case, questioned both sides but zeroed in on environmental crimes and city corruption. Vivian's on-camera meltdown included confessions about forced sales and punishing non-conforming neighbors, statements federal prosecutors would treasure. Her volunteers vandalizing private property in matching shirts with demolition tools was comic perfection. Nothing screams grassroots like coordinated uniforms and pro-grade gear. Vivian spent 3 days in county jail because her bond was $50,000 and her accounts were frozen under fraud review. Her mugshot ran on the evening news alongside Sarah Sawyer's expose on HOA corruption and environmental violations. The bully who tormented neighbors for 3 years was finally getting the spotlight she craved. Her financial empire collapsed like dominoes in an earthquake. Banks froze her shell accounts pending fraud probes. 3 families got foreclosure notices on homes tied to her development schemes.
The HOA's insurer canceled coverage due to criminal activity, leaving the board personally liable for damages. Janet's digging uncovered the smoking gun. Vivian had stolen $127,000 from community funds to pay off failing real estate loans. The yearly audit was done by her brother-in-law's firm, explaining how the theft hid for 2 years. 15 families demanded an emergency vote for new leadership. Dr. Hernandez was named president by unanimous choice, while Marcus and Janet took charge of financial oversight. Their first move was apologizing to victims and enforcing full transparency.
On spending. The federal case surged forward when the FBI's financial crimes team opened an investigation based on EPA referrals. A grand jury issued subpoenas for 3 years of HOA records, Shell bank statements, and all communications between Vivian and Commissioner Morse. That night, I stood in our quiet backyard watching the sunset fade orange and purple, traffic replaced by birdsong and children's laughter in safe spaces. Elena squeezed my hand, her wedding ring catching the last light. "It's really over, isn't it?" she whispered. "Almost," I said, thinking of Jake's tow trucks staged around the neighborhood. One last surprise for any who still backed her scheme. The federal courthouse in Dallas was packed like a playoff game. Vivian Ashworth's sentencing drew over 200 neighbors, reporters, and prosecutors who built their case on my carefully logged evidence. Marble halls echoed with whispers and camera clicks as people filled Judge Patricia Morrison's courtroom. I sat in the front row with Elena and Sophia, surrounded by allies who'd become true friends. Marcus wore his dress uniform, Dr. Hernandez carried medical testimony, and Janet had gathered a support group of a dozen families scarred by Vivian's tyranny. The air reeked of nerves and costly lawyer cologne. Judge Morrison entered with the weight of someone about to sentence organized crime. Prosecutors had presented 847 pieces of evidence across 3 days, including every photo, video, and document Rex and I collected during the ordeal. Vivian's court-appointed lawyer looked like he wished he were anywhere else. The victim impact statements opened with Elena recounting workplace intimidation and threats against our family. Her voice stayed calm as she described how Vivian weaponized her career and terrorized our teenage daughter. The tension in that courtroom was heavy enough to slice through. Dr. Hernandez testified about stress-related treatment required by multiple residents who had endured harassment and intimidation. Marcus gave his military view on proportional response, explaining how Vivian's tactics broke basic rules of civilized conflict resolution. 12 other families shared stories of extortion, intimidation, and property violations. The pattern was unmistakable. Vivian hadn't just singled me out, she was running a criminal racket meant to scare homeowners into selling cheap. When her turn came, her court lawyer tried a plea for mercy, blaming money trouble and community stress. But Vivian couldn't restrain herself. She burst into a rambling speech about property values and standards that sounded like a broken real estate commercial. "Your Honor, I was defending families from hostile neighbors who ignored community guidelines," she insisted, voice rising. "These people were dragging down everyone's investments with selfish acts." Judge Morrison allowed 15 minutes of scattered accusations before shutting her down. Watching her rant about property values while facing prison was like hearing someone whine about parking tickets during a murder trial. The prosecution's evidence was crushing. Catherine Silverman's timeline detailed escalating crimes from harassment to destruction to environmental violations. Security footage showed vandalism, intimidation, and midnight construction. Financial reports exposed $340,000 in stolen funds. The environmental expert testified about lasting damage from illegal wetland building. Federal law treats environmental crimes harshly, especially paired with corruption and racketeering. The prosecutors had built an airtight case worthy of textbooks. Judge Morrison's explanation of forfeiture was music to me. Vivian would lose all property bought with dirty money, including her house, investments, and the BMW already seized. Those assets would repay victims and restore the environment.
When the judge handed down an 8-year federal sentence, the courtroom erupted in applause that shook the marble walls. Vivian went pale as prison became real. Commissioner Morse had already received 5 years in a separate case, and 3 city officials were pleading guilty for lighter terms. The press exploded. Sarah Sawyer's live broadcast reached 2.3 million Texans, showing how one homeowner's records exposed corruption and crime. National outlets spread the story as proof of HOA abuse and citizen persistence. The environmental victory went beyond my hopes. Federal court ordered $2.1 million for wetland restoration paid with seized assets. My land would serve as the northern edge of a new protected corridor. The EPA planned to use our case as a model for tackling future corruption-linked environmental crimes. The property rights win was equally huge. Rockwell v. Willowbrook Commons HOA would be cited in law schools and courts nationwide. The Texas legislature began drafting the Property Owner Protection Act based on our case. Judge Morrison's closing words carried constitutional weight. This case shows the dangers of unchecked
Authority and systematic harassment. Mr. Rockwell's patience and records saved this community from years of abuse. Let this ruling serve as warning. Property rights are not negotiable in America. The financial fallout came fast. Civil suits awarded me $480,000 in damages and attorney fees. RICO treble damages were applied to every act of harassment and property destruction. The HOA's insurer covered extra environmental restoration costs. As federal marshals took Vivian away in cuffs, she still claimed she had defended property values. Her last words to the cameras were predictably petty. "This is all his fault," she snapped, pointing at me like a child caught stealing cookies. Outside the courthouse, Elena and I stood in warm sunshine, surrounded by neighbors and friends who had stood firm against organized crime disguised as community management. The taste of justice was sweeter than any success from my building career. "Ready to go home?" Elena asked, squeezing my hand. "More than ready," I said, thinking of the quiet gravel road waiting for us. "Let's go celebrate freedom. Justice is best when shared with those who deserve it. That's why I gave $200,000 of the award to start the Willowbrook Veteran Scholarship, a fund to help military families with college costs." Elena joined Dr. Hernandez and Marcus on the board, turning our alliance of survival into one of community service. The first scholarship went to the son of a neighbor who had stood with us throughout the fight. Seeing that boy accept his check while his veteran father wiped away tears in our community center proved the struggle had been worth every sleepless night and legal bill. Elena's homemade cookies filled the air as families celebrated together. The environmental restoration surpassed all expectations. Within 6 months, crews finished wetland repair early and under budget. Protected Miller's Creek now hosts wildlife again, including rare painted buntings not seen here in decades. Their songs drift over our land like nature's anthem, replacing the diesel roar of Vivian's crews. My gravel road became part of the preserve, marked as a low-impact nature trail connecting our subdivision to the new sanctuary. Families now walk their children along the same path Vivian tried to steal, reading signs about conservation and property rights, paid for with her seized assets. The irony was delicious. Sophia earned a full ride to the University of Texas engineering program after her essay on standing up to bullies and defending what's right won a statewide contest. She plans to study environmental engineering, inspired by the restoration she watched unfold. Elena's promotion to assistant superintendent came with district recognition for her leadership during the crisis. Our postponed family trip to Alaska was finally funded by documentary appearance fees. Watching grizzlies pull salmon from rivers while Sophia planned her courses felt like the perfect prize for surviving suburban warfare. Elena's laughter echoing across untouched wilderness was the sweetest sound I'd heard in years. Property values told the true story of our victory. Our home rose 45% in value after the corruption was exposed and the environment restored.
Neighboring properties climbed thanks to their proximity to the new wildlife corridor. The area rebranded as Willowbrook Conservation Community, a name that finally meant more than marketing spin. Legal reforms born from our case became the Texas Property Owner Protection Act, signed with bipartisan support. The law requires HOAs to carry $2 million in liability coverage for officer misconduct, creates a state ombudsman office for property rights disputes, and criminalizes harassment campaigns against homeowners. Vivian's criminal legacy became the blueprint for protecting future families. Jake Morrison's towing business tripled after the publicity, specializing in HOA accountability that keeps corrupt boards nervous. Sarah Sawyer's Emmy-winning documentary Neighborhood Nightmare reached 15 million homes and inspired new laws in a dozen states. The community transformation was profound. Dr. Hernandez won the HOA presidency with 89% of the vote, rolling out transparent governance and publishing budgets monthly. Dues dropped from $2,400 to $400 per household once corruption and kickbacks were stripped out. Marcus and Rex launched a private investigation firm that has helped 37 families fight abusive HOAs across Texas. 3 families nearly forced out by Vivian's foreclosure scams kept their homes with restitution funds. Her old house was turned into a community center, offering conflict resolution training, a poetic reversal of criminal real estate into civic good. Our 3rd annual Freedom Road Festival last month drew more than 500 guests from across the state to celebrate the triumph of standing up to bullies. The smell of barbecue and the sound of children's laughter filled the grounds where Vivian's guards once
harassed visitors. As I write, Elena and I are preparing for semi-retirement, maybe consulting for families facing HOA abuse. Rex is already investigating corruption in 3 other towns, and we joke about starting a traveling roadshow to teach property rights. The sound of children playing on our restored gravel road during festivals sums up exactly what we fought to protect. Their laughter blending with bird songs from the preserved wetland, just as we dreamed when we first bought our piece of freedom. Got your own HOA nightmare? Share it in the comments below. You never know who needs to hear they're not alone. And don't forget to subscribe to HOA Stories for more David versus Goliath property rights victories. Next week, I'll tell you about Margaret Thompson, the 72-year-old grandmother in Oregon who used an old property law called adverse possession to claim her corrupt city council's parking lot. Sometimes the best revenge really is living well and keeping detailed records. Empowered by community leadership and the peace of mornings free from exhaust fumes, we proved that patience and persistence always outlast petty tyrants, especially when you document everything. Remember, your HOA dues are not their private piggy bank, and renewable energy systems are protected by law in most states. Drop a comment with your worst HOA story, and don't forget to subscribe to HOA Stories for more tales of neighborhood justice and corrupt board comeuppance.